And welcome back to the broadcast. I'm your host, Armstrong Williams. David Penner is an EDD Superintendent, Cluster 9, Office of the Chief Schools. Chris Pratt, of course, is an investigative reporter at Sinclair Broadcast Group. And Sadiq Ali is an author and founder of Millionaire Manners Academy. Let's get to the heart of the conversation. That was a terrific conversation with President Frederick. It tells us that anybody can learn. They have the right parenting, the right teachers, the right resources, the right schools, and the right motivation. There is no question that I want everybody to understand that everybody has the capacity to learn. Doesn't matter what their socioeconomic background is. But the problem is, and you've uncovered something in the Baltimore schools that is so shocking and so devastating. In fact, I had you on our Sirius show because I couldn't believe what you were saying. I couldn't believe the people from across the country, particularly who in Baltimore, called in to reaffirm of what you're about to tell us. Tell us your story through your investigation.
Well, to give people an understanding, Sinclair Broadcast Group has started a 2 or 3 year long investigation into the public school system in Baltimore City with the understanding that a lot of the issues that Baltimore City has, a lot of the other cities, inner city schools, and even county schools around the country are having the same one. So we started this deep dive investigation about 6 months ago. Some of the things that we have found are in Baltimore City last year, there are 6 schools that do not have a single student proficient in any state testing. 6 schools. They were open last year. We broke this story. It went nationwide. They're open again this year. Maybe you want to ask the question, why? Again, not one kid proficient in any state testing. In Baltimore City schools as a whole, of all state testing, there's between 13 and 15% of the students that are proficient in math and are proficient in English. So to break that down, 85 to 90% of kids in Baltimore City schools are not proficient in math and English. 85 to 90% in a school system, Armstrong, that gets $1.4 billion a year. It's the 4th most funded school district in America in terms of per pupil spending. So we uncovered all these statistics, we dug into the data, we analyzed spreadsheets, and that's how we came up with all of that. And it's information that other media isn't doing because it's hard to do, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resources. But we're devoted to this because there's a problem. There isn't anyone who's going to say there isn't a problem. So with those statistics that we just brought up, where is the outrage? I've been talking to people in Baltimore City. A lot of teachers, a lot of educators, principals, assistant principals are coming to us because they see the problem. And there's a large percentage of people who work in Baltimore City in the school system that also see the problem. But it's not being addressed. So they come to me and they say, okay, well, we had this situation in Charlottesville not long ago. It's a bad situation. As a result, there are protests, there's our rallies, and statues come down. You have a school in Baltimore City, one school, where we uncovered in the past 11 months, 6 kids from this school have been shot and killed in Baltimore City. 6. One school, 6 dead teenagers. And these teachers are saying to me, where's the protests? Where are the rallies? Yeah, we don't have any more Confederate statues left in Baltimore City, but we have 6 dead kids from one high school. These are some of the things that we're uncovering. And what we are trying to do, and what you understand and why we're here, is because this is a major issue. Not just in Baltimore City, it's a major issue in America. And education has that unique distinction of being the one thing that everything else is connected to. The economy, crimes, home values, taxes, everything goes back to education. If we can get into this and we can figure out what's really happening in Baltimore City, why it's been this way for decades, despite billions and billions of dollars being pumped in, we can start to make a difference.
Sadiq, you live in Baltimore. Are you shocked by what you hear?
Not shocked at all. Not shocked at all for a number of reasons. I think, first and foremost, as we sort of spoke about off air, I think it's when you try to disconnect education as a singular topic as opposed to looking at it as part of a holistic issue, I think we're always going to have a challenge. I think to Chris's point, education is but one of the pieces that we have to analyze. I think it does have, again, the greatest tie into some of the other challenges that we see, but I think we also need to dig into what else in the history of these cities and these communities that we're seeing and how that plays into what we're seeing in terms of outcomes from our educational system. I think the other piece that we have to look at as well is what is the overall goal? And this is something that, again, Dr. Pender and I spoke about, what is the actual goal of education? Is it to just create students who can just, again, who just participate in rote memorization? Or are we trying to produce young people and students that can sustain themselves, that can contribute to society? Because I think when you talk to all those different folks that Chris made reference to, I think you're going to get wildly different answers in terms of what folks' idea of the end game and the end goal of the education system is. And one of my other big points is we need to start looking at education in terms of not just about education, but we have to start separating school from education, because school and education are two different things. And I think for too long we focus all our time and attention and energy on just schools as opposed to us looking at what makes good education. And I think that's a community, that's a holistic approach that we need to look at if we're going to fix things.
David?
You know, I think that Chris and Sadiq both mentioned two things that are very relevant to this work. The first thing is, as you know, Secretary Duncan called D.C. Public Schools the fastest growing district in the country. But we have a lens that's a little different than Baltimore. I live in Baltimore and I work in D.C. And I will tell you that one of the advantages we've had is that we've been able to negotiate the teacher contract where we can move out ineffective teachers who don't have urgency, who don't believe in this work, and we can bring in people who philosophically align to the work. We also have something I think that's really good in DC, is we have a unique relationship with our charter schools. Competition is good. And when you have schools that are out there creating unique, innovative ways to help kids' social emotional learning, increase the rigor and the standards, connected to careers outside, it forces us to pick up and improve our own game. So I think, to Chris's point, it is concerning that there's not an urgency level in Baltimore, and it exists in Chicago and Newark and in other districts like that. But when you have philosophically aligned people coming to the district, like DC does, when you have a focus on social and emotional learning and accountability and competition, like we do with the charter schools, I think it changes the game. And that's why DC Public Schools has been increasing its proficiency numbers. Our graduation rates have increased, the highest in the country over the last 3 years, because there's competition, because we're investing in social emotional learning of kids, because our teachers are accountable, and because, and frankly, Michelle Rhee, Kaya Henderson, and now Chancellor Antoine Wilson built a culture of accountability. But we have one distinct advantage over those. We're not a state. So Congress passed legislation where, while we negotiate our contracts with teachers and our educators, ultimately we have the leverage and the right to remove ineffective educators. And that problem, which I think foments in a lot of our urban districts where there isn't a level of urgency, it doesn't happen. And I think that's a huge issue that we've got to bring back to the table, which is what are we going to do to hold teachers accountable? The other thing I've seen, and there's a lot of research around this, but about 96% of professors in college have never actually been practitioners in the classroom. It's a real problem. Because I can tell you just as a young teacher in Baltimore, they were teachers in an ed psych course. You know, when a kid is talking, to go stand near their area, right? And the first time I did that, I think a kid looked up and said, "What the heck are you doing standing next to me?" We're back in the textbook. I think our colleges are producing a lot of teachers that are not ready for the classroom. And one of the things I'm working on a book right now called The Band-Aid Industry. We put a lot of people into education who are not qualified to do that work. And then we spend millions and millions of dollars on professional development to help fix what could have been fixed on the front end. A doctor, a lawyer would never enter a courtroom or a surgery without the requisite skills to do that work. Yet educators enter classrooms every day without that. You look at Finland, right? You look at Singapore. They take from the top 10% of their graduates. The United States takes from nearly its bottom 10% of its college graduates. That's a recipe for failure. You add that and what Chris pointed out in terms of the fact that we don't have that urgency because educators are in there and they're not held accountable. And you take into what Sadiq says, we're not teaching social emotional learning, we're not giving kids the skills that they need and connecting them to careers, and you're going to have challenges like that in Baltimore that are growing.
What I like to do when we come back is ask the question that should always be asked. If $1.4 billion, the fourth highest in the country, is not spent educating these kids, providing resources, and not showing on the SAT, the ACT test scores, where is this money going? Is it in salaries? Is it payoff? Is it corruption? Because obviously there's something that's terribly amiss from this picture with where that money is. And we're going to ask about the money trail when we return. Don't go away. David Penner, Sadiq Ali, Chris Pass. I want to give you a chance to respond to what David and Sadiq had to say, because I thought David made some very fascinating and insightful points, and then we want to get into where that money is being spent.
Sure, there's a couple things that you hit on that are really important. 25% of the teachers that are in Baltimore City classrooms are not certified teachers. So to your point, you would never put an attorney beyond the bar to argue for your client. You'd never put a doctor in an operating room to operate on someone if they haven't passed the tests. But in Baltimore City, 25% of the teachers are teaching the kids in the classroom, and they're not certified teachers. Another point that he made was, where is this energy for things to change? And I can tell you this, 6 months ago when we started this investigation, we started doing stories, and we're asking very hard questions, and we are finding information that's very hard for people to want to accept. I have not had, and this is not an exaggeration, Armstrong, I have not had one person contact me saying, "What are you doing?" Everybody understands that there is a problem. There is an energy in Baltimore City to fix it. But it's been like this for decades. It's been like this for generations. People have accepted it. There's a degree of status quo. There's a degree of acceptance that, okay, well, 85% of our kids aren't proficient in math. Oh well. No,
But I
that's
also
not the way it
think
should be.
it's important to point out that I don't think the office of the mayor has any autonomy over the school system. It's totally separate. So it's strictly a school system is a separate entity in and of itself.
Yes, it is an independent entity. The mayor does not have the control over it. The school board's not even elected. So who is the school board accountable to? And this is one of the main issues, not only in Baltimore City, but in Maryland. A lot of the school boards are not elected. So if the school board's not doing what you want them to do, you run for school board, you try to kick the people off the school board. In Baltimore City, no, not elected at all. And they're volunteers. They're running a $1.4 billion organization. They're part-time volunteers who are not elected.
So where's the money? Help us follow the money trail.
I think even before the money piece, I think again as we get into the weeds a little bit, so to speak, I think again when we look at the composition of schools, okay, and how curricula are designed and made up, we're not focusing on learning styles anymore. So we get to some of the root cause about why some of the issues exist. If we look at how students are engaged when they come into a school, and we're talking majority young black and brown youth, okay? So when a young person comes into the classroom, how are they being engaged? Are they being focused on one of the 9 learning skills that have been identified or learning styles that have been identified? Is it all just, or again, or is it all just rote memorization? If we go back to, 100 years ago, we talk about Carter G. Woodson and Miseducation of the Negro. He talked about in that book project-based learning as a means. This was about 100 years ago. Project-based learning as a means to engage all the different facets and faculties of the individual, particularly when we talk about cultural relevance in education. European children, white children, learn differently than Latino children, than African American children. These are some of the things that on face value are being spoken about, but they aren't being addressed in a meaningful manner. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of from bottom up. If we're engaging young people in the right way, then by virtue of that engagement, children are going to be more excited about coming to school. They're going to retain more. And again, we're able to chip away at what should be the overall goal. And again, that is to produce self-sufficient young people when they matriculate through the system.